here we are with Dr. Vikram Mancharamani from Harvard University. He's a lecturer and trend watcher there. We're so happy to have Dr. Mancharamani speak to us here at the Page Annual Conference. He just gave a brilliant presentation on some of the trends that are shaping our world today and into the future. Now, Dr. Mancharamani has a really interesting perspective on the world and an interesting lenses with which he uses to address these trends. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So, I really believe that this single lens mantra that has domineered our thinking process for really the last 30 to 50 years, I think is ill-suited for today's uncertain environment. And I really do believe that it's important to use multiple lenses. So, as you heard from me today, I actually went through looking at the world not just economically, but also politically, looking at technological trends, and also looking at social trends and demographic analysis. And when I put those together, I think you see a slightly different world than you would if you looked only through one lens. So this is a personal philosophy, as you said, that I've used in my career throughout. It's made me a little bit of an odd duck. It's hard to put me in different departments and academic institutions. It's hard to find a silo I fit in, but it's a world I love, and it's the analysis I conduct.
And we increasingly need to adopt some of these kind of generalist principles and apply them to our own functions as corporate communicators. It's just an interesting way to view the world. I think it helps provide context and really set the framework for the bigger picture around our roles. Now, what do you kind of look ahead to and see as kind of the issues and trends that we should really be concerned about as CCOs?
Yeah, so let me first, before I answer that question, let me just say I totally agree with your statement that being generalist and using a generalist philosophy as a CCO is really important. Because I think, and I really believe it can help transform the role of the CCO from one that is more reactive to one that's more proactive. And sort of say, hold on a sec, here's what I think may be a topic or issue that is really important for us as a company to communicate, both internally as well as externally. And I think that's really critical, the identification of the issues. So when I use my multiple lenses, the issues I see as forthcomingly really important in the future here are things like the purpose of the business. Right? I mean, you've heard Larry Fink and the Business Roundtable talk about this. This is an issue that needs to be communicated more about. This is an issue that companies can get ahead of. So that's one topic for sure. I would say, obviously, climate change, carbon footprint, those are topics that are on the minds of both consumers as well as employees. But I think just generally the whole value proposition and sort of stakeholder mindset, rather than a mere shareholder mindset, is something that is a trend we should be paying attention to. I think there's both pros and cons to taking that approach, but it's definitely a topic that needs to be on the agenda of CCOs.
Interesting, and you've kind of applied some of these principles to your own studies and trend watching, and you've pinpointed some interesting areas of both demographic and economic growth and decline. And in particular, when we think of demographic growth, we're thinking of areas of the world like India and Africa, and how are we as a global economy able to adapt to kind of those growing demographic areas,
Sure.
Scaling properly, making sure that GDP isn't necessarily just scaling with the population, but growing in order to accommodate a population.
I would tell you, so let's just focus on India for a second. I actually think India is really vulnerable right now. I think they're misdirecting resources towards fulfillment of current day needs rather than future education responsibilities that I think the government should have. China was the last country that developed through an industrialization logic, which was take the farmers, put them in the factories, get productivity, get a middle class, and you're off to a consumer society. India may have missed the window to do that, in the sense that the illiterate, unskilled Indian farm worker has to now compete with robots. And so what we need is an Indian population that's educated that can step in there. Barring a meaningful focus on education, India, because of the demographics you just highlighted, I think risks never developing a large middle class. And that would be just a tragedy of epic proportions and lives and tons of potential that would be unfulfilled. So I think this is a really urgent topic. To your point also of what's happening in Africa, there's a race. There's a race in all of these countries between economic growth and demographics. And what they need to do is actually get either the economic growth up or slow down the demographic trajectories in some of these places. Again, education helps that. Educated women actually have fewer children. More wealthy populations tend to have fewer children. And so getting birth rates to fall, I think, will actually help the economic outlook for these countries as well. So I think there's a couple cross currents there that we need to think about.
And while it's a very current trend right now in the news, the U.S.-China trade war, I believe you had a really, really interesting perspective on this conflict, so to speak, that goes beyond the trade war that we see in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times every day. So what are some of those bigger picture trends that we see with these two embattled countries?
Yeah, so I'll say, first of all, this is not just a trade war. Everyone says, oh, what do you think about the trade war, Vikram? And I say, this is not just a trade war. This is a trade war, this is a space race, this is a currency war, this is a sort of military hegemony in Asia war, or conflict, rivalry perhaps the better word. We hope it doesn't get to war. This is literally a rising superpower against an entrenched superpower and the conflicts that produce. That's part of the reason why my advice to corporations that I talk to is, listen, a trade war getting settled doesn't mean the rivalry has ended. The rivalry is real and will continue to persist for some period of time. The United States and China need to learn to live together, and we haven't done that yet. And so that's a sort of tumultuous process, hopefully not a conflict-ridden process, but it's going to be a non-linear road, let's just put it that way. There are going to be some bumps on this road to getting to the point where we learn to live together, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, certainly. And the last point I want to touch on is something that you spoke at length about during your presentation, fears over a coming recession. And you kind of indicated that there are some KPIs that we could look to as a way to kind of at least somewhat try to not predict, but at least look ahead and prepare for an inbound recession. Sure. Some of this, you mentioned the skyscraper warning, looking at countries who are trying to build the tallest tower in the world and how that pertains or portends an inbound recession. Sure. So do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, so let me talk first about the idea of a recession risk. Look, trees don't grow to the moon. We know that. Things don't grow forever. Economies tend to be cyclical. Now, the cycle can be extended, etc., but we have a lot of indicators that suggest there's caution is warranted at this point in time, economically. And there's so many indicators from the credit markets and sort of other dynamics that suggest, hold on a second, it's really worthy of taking a pause and being a little more risk averse in terms of anticipating economic growth, specifically in the United States. Now, globally, I think it's a different dynamic. There are parts of the world where we really do have some meaningful concerns. The skyscraper indicator I talked to you about earlier was really about what's happening in the Middle East. They're building the world's tallest skyscrapers. That's never a good sign. That indicates easy money conditions, speculative instincts, and some hubris / overconfidence. So I never like that. Combine that with a large military budget, escalation, and rising tensions, as we've seen recently in the Middle East, and I think we've got a really toxic combination. It feels like a tinderbox, and there's people playing with matches. And I don't like that. I hope nothing comes of it, but it doesn't make you feel good. So I would say that's the way I think about it. I think the biggest economic development of the current environment is global supply chains are now shifting. And when they shift around an optimized, when supply chains were optimized around a globalized world and they get re-optimized, that is a process that entails friction and higher costs, at least temporarily. And that means corporate profits, I think, have a headwind against them as these supply chains shift. That means valuations in financial markets may prove to be more elevated than we currently believe, which means that there's a possibility also of a financial slowdown or downdraft similar to an economic downdraft. So those are some of the concerns I have.
Excellent, and we truly appreciate Dr. Manshar-Amani giving us the time here. It's increasingly important, as we said, for CCOs to kind of adopt generalistic principles as they look at the broad scope of their enterprises, and you brought a valuable perspective to this, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks.